very important question. Chicken or pizza? Yeah. Well, I ate the I don't have it very much. Very rare treat.
It's good.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short,
create community, find meaning, work for justice.
Oh, man. It's so good to have the backup, I gotta tell you. Well, welcome to each and every one of you today. We embrace, as always, all that you bring with you to this place, your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, your differences. All that helps make you who you are is welcome here this morning. This includes those of you who are joining us in person in our sanctuary here, as well as the many of you who are joining us via our live stream this morning. So thanks to one and all for being here. We're so glad to have you. And speaking of our streaming service, we do have an early service Zoom meeting as well. So we've got lots of folks, believe it or not, we actually have more people attending our first service than our second service these days, but most of them are on streaming devices. So if you're a regular streamer, in other words, you like to stream at this time, maybe one or two of you, and you would want to start a Zoom room, maybe host it on behalf of the congregation, it's kind of nice because we can show who's Zooming with us at least on our screen here and even interact a little bit during the service, and it's a nice way to engage. I just attended a Zoom social hour with about 15 or so attendees this morning. So it's kind of a nice way to interact. So we're still looking for someone who's willing to host during our second service. So if that's you, please reach out to me and let me know. We'd love to make that happen. Other than that, I don't have any big announcements at the start of our service today, so why don't you take a couple of extra minutes to greet one another. And if you are streaming, feel free to shoot us a text or let somebody else know you're thinking about them. All right, there will be more opportunity to visit with one another during social hour following our service. But let's move forward now with the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Our opening words this morning are adapted from a Touchstone issue. It's a little newsletter that you can subscribe to, and it's an issue from 2020. In an address in January 1980 at the First Parish in Cambridge, novelist Kurt Vonnegut said that dignity is something human beings give to each other. He believed that if we do not do this, there is no other way dignity can be acquired. The key solution to human problems, Vonnegut kept insisting, is to find human dignity for all human beings, even those who seem to least deserve it. Vonnegut believed that dignity isn't an exclusive privilege for the well-to-do or successful, but is intrinsic to simply being a human being. As Vonnegut knew, our strong societal bias towards doing concludes that our worth and dignity are conditional on what we do, not who we are. It teaches that worth and dignity are external rewards, not internal realities. What are you worth when you are not doing anything? The affirmation of inherent dignity is an abiding reminder to all to hold heads high that we may look in each other's eyes and see ourselves lovingly reflected there as we become the mirror for each other. Our eyes and our hearts work best when they are both windows and mirrors.
Our first in-service hymn of the day is One World. It is in your gray hymnal. It's number 133, or of course, you may access the screen. Please rise as you're willing and able. One world, this for all its sorrow. One world, shaping one tomorrow. One humanity, though riven, we to whom a world is given. From one world there is no turning. For one world the prophets yearning. One the world of poets, sages. One world goal of all the ages. World so eagerly expected. World so recklessly rejected. What as common folk have willed it. One as covenants can build it. World of friendly words and faces. Cherished arts and honored races. One world free in word and science. People free, its firm reliance.
All right, we are now going to kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our hearts and minds this morning. And we'll begin as we have been, lighting a candle on behalf of the people of Ukraine and that part of the world that are being most impacted by the devastating violence and war happening there. Also want to kindle a candle for my friend and our friend, the Reverend Happy Watkins, who called me yesterday to let me know that he's had a rough week. His brother-in-law passed away this week and had a step-granddaughter who had to undergo emergency surgery and some other issues that have really troubled him, and he asked if we would like the biggest candle we have for him this morning. So we do. And then we want to light a candle of celebration for the Christensen family. Billy, Kelsey, Alex, Brooklyn, Zuri, and Theo, and great-great-great-grandmother. Did I get too many greats in there this time? Great-grandmother. But she's a great-great-grandmother to those kids, because they have officially a new addition to their family. Thursday, January 26th was official adoption day for Charlotte, who a lot of you have seen, better known as Charlie, who's about the cutest person in the church, I think. So anyway, congratulate them next time you see them, and welcome Charlie officially to the family. And then one more, Doug Deaton was here, another church member, for our first service. and we were able to sing happy birthday to him then. Today actually happens to be his birthday, in which he ventures into a brand new decade, his 80s. It's 80th birthday today. So when you see Doug, be sure and congratulate him on that. And we lit a candle a couple of weeks for you, Wayne. I think you had your 94th birthday. So I know Doug is still a youngster to you, but it's good to wish you a happy birthday in person as well. Good to see you. Yes. Okay, let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others that you might be thinking of, and as always, you're welcome to name them aloud at this time if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. And we now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which helps sustain this community and our mission to the larger world.
Thank you, choir. At this point, I'd like to invite all of the children to come forward. And while they're making their way, I'll take this time to plug a couple of events that you'll see in your bulletin. This Friday at 5 o'clock in the chapel, I'll be leading an all-levels yoga class. It was a community auction item that we're opening up to everybody, so come at 5 for a little yoga, and then some kombucha and some chocolate mint energy balls, and just bring a donation of any amount that goes to the church. It's also the night of our parents' night out, so I know some of you are planning to be there for pizza and games and hanging out while your parents get to enjoy an evening of free babysitting. So check those out in the bulletin. Let me know if you have questions. Right, this morning's story for all ages is something I've adapted from a story by Martha Dallas. And I'm curious to know what all of you believe about what is the best food. So, think about that, and when you have one in mind, raise your hand. All right. Atlas, what's your favorite food? Watermelon. How about you, Ruby? Pizza. Gus? Pepperoni pizza. Arthur, did you have a hand up? No? Max? Still thinking, still thinking. All right, I know that all of you have been thinking too. So I'm going to make a big arrow with my fingers and scan the audience. And when I come to you, feel free to shout out what you believe is the best food.
Chocolate cake.
Pasta.
Cheese. Kombucha.
Hershey bars.
Ice cream.
Pizza gets the most votes.
All right. And Max has thought of something. Yes, Max? Snickers. All right. We've got some candy bar fans. And watermelon. Love watermelon. Makes me think of summer. So I believe that many of you, and especially you, the food that you believe is the best today may not be what you believe is the best for the rest of your life. It's very possible that the best food might get knocked down off of its throne and be replaced by a different food, a new best food. As Unitarian Universalists, we really value the freedom that each of us has to believe about not just things like what we think is the best food, but about bigger things like, why are we here? What's the meaning of our lives? What's most important and valuable to me? How can I be most true to the purpose I see for my being alive in the world? We affirm the freedom to believe what we choose about these things, but we also have the responsibility to work out those beliefs with thought and care. And thank goodness we don't have to do that all by ourselves, right? That sounds like a lot of hard work. It's like we can offer one another tastes of ideas that seem true. It's like together we're at a big potluck, and we each bring our treasured beliefs to share with one another here in our congregation. We can put several on our plate. First, the ones that we're confident we like, the ones that we know for sure are going to taste good. And then maybe we go back for seconds and we try something that our friends recommended as really yummy. And sometimes those new yummy tastes will become the new best favorite. So kids, in Children's Chapel today, I encourage you to share with each other not just what you believe, but also what you believe is the best food, and perhaps even more fun, what you think is the worst. Join me now in singing our children out to Children's Chapel.
Now is the time in our service for meditation and contemplation, in words and in silence. So find a receptive posture, take some deep breaths. Close your eyes if you wish, as I lead you into the silence with these words by Norwegian poet Rolf Jacobsen. All people are children when they sleep. There's no war in them then. They open their hands and breathe in that quiet rhythm heaven has given them. If only we could speak to one another then, when our hearts are half-open flowers, words like golden bees would drift in.
We're going to have a responsive reading this morning, number 521 in the back of the gray hymnal, number 521. And Deb is going to approach the microphone to read with our respondent so that those of you who are streaming will at least be able to hear the entire reading. Sorry we don't have the words up on a slate for you. But there's a good enough group in here today. I'm going to ask that this side of the sanctuary read with me. And this side of the room, including the choir, will be our respondents. And that means, these are the professionals. So we're going to have to work hard to keep up with them, okay? Okay, number 521. May I be no one's enemy, and may I be the friend of that which is eternal and abides.
May I wish for every person's happiness and envy none.
May I never rejoice in the ill fortune of one who has wronged me.
May I, to the extent of my power, give needful help to all who are in want.
May I never fail a friend.
May I respect myself.
May I always keep tame that which rages within me.
May I accustom myself to be gentle and never be angry with others because of circumstances.
May I know good people and follow in their footsteps. Good job. Thank you.
Sweet
Thank you all. That was beautiful, as always. Thank you, Deb. Nice. I got so enraptured in it, I had to remind myself where we were at in the service. So I've been on a rather nostalgic B.J. Thomas kick lately. How many of you remember B.J. Thomas? Yeah, you know, his place at the top of the music charts actually spanned 3 decades, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and 3 genres, country, Christian, and pop rock, with hits like Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, Hooked on a Feeling, I Just Can't Help Believing, and another Somebody's Done Somebody Wrong song. He died just a couple years ago, in case you've been wondering about him, in 2021 at age 78, a young man. Anyway, a couple days ago I was listening to an automated mix of his music that led to an album that I hadn't heard of. Songs from the Neighborhood, the music of Mr. Rogers. Yeah. So, and by the way, I learned from a Canadian earlier that not everybody in the world is familiar with Mr. Rogers, so I apologize for a metaphor some of those streaming with us might not be aware of, but Mr. Rogers was a very beloved host of a children's television show that ran for many years on public television. So anyway, Thomas is among several famous artists who perform pop versions of 13 songs from that beloved children's television show, including John Cicada. How many of you remember John Cicada, the great Cuban singer who starts it off with, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" Of course. And I got this very warm, nostalgic feeling hearing it, but to my surprise, it conjured up sad thoughts and images rather than pleasant memories of Mr. Rogers singing the iconic melody while changing into his sweater and his sneakers at the start of each show. Upon hearing, "I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you," I suddenly thought of those living in the Catalyst. That's the former Spokane hotel that was recently transformed into a homeless shelter or transitional housing for the homeless that so happens to be in my neighborhood. And I thought about the hostility and the fear so many of my neighbors expressed over this addition, and how it must feel to those now living in the Catalyst to know that they are unwelcome, feared, and misunderstood by so many, especially at a time when they're in most need of our understanding and of our help. I've always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. And I wanted to stand outside that shelter and blast that song to everyone inside. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, "Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor?" And I thought of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked war in Ukraine, of the heartless destruction of neighborhoods and the killing of neighbors happening there. Such barbarity raging at the very start of another new year instead of living as we teach our children the world over. It's a neighborly day in the beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I thought of all the unnecessary and tragic mass shootings in our country, including the most recent in California. And of course, I thought of the 6 officers in Memphis who only a couple of weeks ago beat Tyree Nichols to death in his own neighborhood. Won't you please, won't you please, please, won't you be my neighbor? Neighbors are people who are close to us And friends are people who are close to our hearts. I like to think of you as my neighbor and my friend. I thought of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, the young Iranian woman who was killed in October while in custody of Iran's immoral morality police. And I thought of what a sad end to 1 year and the discouraging beginning of another. In today's small world, Iran is our neighbor, and so is Mahsa Amini. Memphis is our neighbor, and so is Tyree Nichols. Los Angeles and Half Moon Bay, California are our neighbors, and so are those who are now not even the most recent victims of mass shootings in our nation. The people of Ukraine are our neighbors, and so are all those who've been killed, injured, and suffered loss because of one madman's lust for power. The people living in Camp Hope, right here in Spokane, are our neighbors, no matter what part of town we live in, and so are the people now living in the Catalyst, just a few miles down the road. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please, please? Won't you be my neighbor? How is it that our species so often engages in the taking of other lives? If I were to answer this question in but one sentence, I'd say it's because we don't recognize our relationship to the victims of our homicidal tendencies. And this has been so since humanity's earliest days on this earth, at which time we lived like other apes still do in small family troops. It is because of this kin selection, as it is referred to by evolutionary psychologists, that remains a part of our genetic makeup, an inherited instinct. Favoring our own kin, those most closely related to us, is an important instinct when it comes to our survival, and particularly the survival of our children, in perpetually passing on our genetic information, which is our biological purpose. As evolutionary psychologists, right, we like to think we have a purpose. We choose our own purpose in life, but biologically that's our purpose. As Robert Wright says in his book, The Moral Animal, the only potentially immortal organic entity is a gene. The only potential immortal organic entity is a gene, or strictly speaking, the pattern of information encoded in the gene, since the physical gene itself will pass away after conveying the pattern through replication. Don't you feel special? So the genetic instinct to favor those most closely related to ourselves remains present in us today, that instinct. The theory of kin selection, coined by biologist William Hamilton in 1963, holds that individuals of any sexually reproducing species will behave altruistically toward kin in proportion to the number of genes they share. Parents and children and full brothers and sisters share 50% of their genes, so will behave more altruistically toward each other than first cousins, who share only 25%, for example. The fewer genes we have in common with others, including more distant relatives, the less altruistic we are instinctively inclined to feel toward them, and even less toward those who have no direct relationship with us at all. So as human societies became larger than the family troop, first as tribes, then kingdoms, then states, and eventually nations, we had to develop additional non-genetic reasons to feel related to each other in order to live peacefully together. We had to find excuses to care for each other. Identifying strongly as a member of one's tribe or kingdom or state or nation in which one is born has proven to be a potent substitute, if not even a hijacker, of our instinct towards kin favoritism or kin selection. This is why in the age of nationalism, it has been acceptable to go to war with those outside of our nations, including collateral damage, the unintentional and sometimes the intentional indiscriminate killing of civilians, because we don't feel related to outsiders. Today, as the age of the nation-state wanes and we feel less bound to our national identities, we are returning to smaller tribal groups based upon a shared religion or ideology or politics or personal identities like race, sexuality, and gender. And this has led to a lot more anxiety and conflict in our lives, since outsiders are no longer a remote reality beyond the borders of our nation, sometimes separated by vast oceans, but can be anyone, anywhere, including our own countrymen and women, our next-door neighbors, classmates, co-workers, and so forth. And this isn't good, given that the fear of differences is about as instinctive in us as is our fondness for kin and kindred spirits. The stories we tell and the warnings that we still give our children about big bad wolves and not talking to strangers are ancient and are indicative of our biological tendency to avoid anything that we are unfamiliar with, anyone we are not familial with, strangers, including their strange beliefs, languages, religions, colors, and cultures. We instinctively dislike those who are dislike us, which leads to ridiculing and demonizing them, which further leads to dehumanizing them, and then to disregarding their worth and their dignity so that we can justify oppressing, exploiting, and even killing them without having to acknowledge that we are harming real human beings. We call them monsters, traitors, criminals, terrorists, anything to avoid acknowledging their humanity. I recall many years ago seeing President George W. Bush on a stage during which he held out his arm as if he were hugging someone, in which he told the audience, "You've got to put your arm around your neighbor and tell him you love him." Yet only moments earlier, the same president who was already responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people living in Afghanistan and Iraq said that he was going to hunt down the terrorists one by one and kill them, no matter how many other outsiders get hurt in the process. It seemed clear to me that his definition of who our neighbors are does not extend beyond the U.S. borders. As much as this attitude grieves me, I cannot blame anyone for succumbing to the powerful genetic instincts that I've outlined, instincts that once worked well to help the fittest, if not the fiercest, of our ancestors survive: kin selection and fear of strangers. But we no longer live in their small worlds and no longer face the constant danger of being eaten alive by a predator or overpowered by another unknown band of humans. This is why during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods, we developed a better way of getting along with each other, even better than substituting our family bonds with tribal, national, and other kinds of identity. We recognized our kinship with all of humanity, and with it the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And this notion, also called universalism, with a small u, when truly believed and cherished, prevents us from hating and harming others, including strangers, as much as if they were members of our own family. When we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we treat them as if they were members of our own family. Because they are. The human family. Another way to put it is that all persons, by virtue of being human beings, have what philosophers call moral status. This is what Immanuel Kant was getting at with his categorical imperative. Act only according to those rules that you can also will as universal laws. A rule, in other words, that is applicable in all circumstances. A rule to live by. And that rule for Kant and others is this recognition that all persons have worth and dignity and therefore must be treated as such. Never as a means to another person's ends, but as an end within themselves, as Kant put it. In his book, Reality Plus, philosopher David Chalmers has a unique section on moral status, explaining that a being has moral status when it's an object of moral concern, in roughly the way that people are objects of moral concern. That is, it's a being whose welfare we need to take into account in our moral deliberations. A being that has moral status is a being whose welfare we must take into account in our moral deliberations. And if we did that, there couldn't be any wars. Or beating of black men to death in the streets. Although this definition takes for granted that at least all human beings have moral status, Chalmers gives an example suggesting even this much isn't always considered so. The Black Lives Matter movement, he says, is all about moral status. Black lives matter as much as human lives do. In the past and even today, many people in many social institutions have treated black lives as if they mattered less than white lives. So even though we say all human beings have moral status and should thus be treated with dignity, many in the world are still treated with less moral status than others, and some with little moral status at all. Given that his book looks at the problems of philosophy through the lens of virtual reality, which is a fun way to play with philosophy, Chalmers asks us to consider if it is ethical to kill virtual persons, including virtual zombies and other computer-generated human simulations. Okay, so let's set aside the ethics of violent games. And the question Chalmers is really asking us to consider is, do simulated persons have moral status? Is it unethical for us to kill them in video games? These philosophical zombies are described as near duplicates of human beings with no conscious inner life at all. Zombies have no subjective experience. And for Chalmers, this is precisely why they don't have moral status. It's why zombie lives don't matter. My own view, he says, shared with many others, is that what bestows moral status is consciousness. If an entity has no capacity for consciousness and never will have, then it has no moral status. It can be treated as an object. Now, this phrase, capacity for consciousness, makes the question of moral status even more complex because it implies our decisions and actions must also consider the welfare of other creatures too. If it can experience something, he says, that should be taken into account in our moral calculations. It's arguable that systems with a minimal degree of consciousness, ants, have only a minimal degree of moral status and so weigh much less heavily than humans in our moral deliberations, but consciousness at least gets them in the door. So ants get to come in the door. So some philosophers, of course, and ethicists argue that it is enough just to be sentient to deserve moral status, meaning that any entity that can experience positive or negative states should have moral status. So it may be necessary to kill a pantry-invading ant colony, but it is not ethical just to step on an ant, extinguishing its existence for no good reason. Arguably. Right? The Jains would say you can't even kill the ants. You've got to let them come into your pantry. So someday, perhaps sooner than we imagine, we will create virtual entities that are conscious and have subjective experiences, and by Chalmers' definition, should grant them moral status at that time. Chalmers makes a good argument that we ourselves are conscious simulations living in a virtual reality. For an intriguing and fun ride down that road, I suggest that you read Reality Plus. But for our purposes, I would say that to a large extent, all of us are living in a reality of our own making, or perhaps one that has been imposed upon us by others, by the culture, but doesn't necessarily reflect reality. This reminded me earlier of a cartoon somebody sent me. It's an image of a Catholic priest shaming a Native American, saying, "If it weren't for us, you'd still be worshiping the sun." And the Native American responds, "Dude, the sun is real." So, right, we think our reality is the truth, and maybe we're wrong. So we all deserve moral status because we do have subjective experiences and because we are conscious, but our grasp of truth and reality is extremely limited. Right? We're not extremely conscious when it comes to all that is to be that there is to be aware of. We are mostly in the dark. And what we are conscious of, our interpretation at least, of the data, may be mostly in our heads. What we consider to be true and real is merely an interpretation of the information that we perceive, and today there is more information bombarding us than ever. Much of it is false to begin with. At best, in my opinion, we should depend upon empirical evidence and sound reason to interpret the reality around us the best we can, but understand that even this much is limited and subject to error. It is also true, as we have seen, that our reality is often shaped by ancient genetic and biological instincts that may no longer serve us. Right? We're driven by unconscious instinctive forces. And if these instincts that have too often led our species to limit, or I should say it is these instincts that have too often led our species to limit the boundaries of our worldviews, so that the only people we treat as real people are those within our small circles of inclusion and recognition. Right? The only ones we consider real people, really, are those within our circles of inclusion and recognition. Our own families, our tribes, our identity group, our religion, our political party, our country, or just those living in the few square blocks around our neighborhood, those living on our side of the tracks. Too many of us treat those outside these small circles as one of Chalmers' philosophical zombies, as if, as he says, there is arguably no one home to mistreat. They can be mistreated because they live outside of the virtual realities, our virtual realities, and are not considered real people, or at least thought of as lesser people, undeserving of the same level of moral status as we should enjoy, because we're right, because we understand the truth, because we have a firmer grasp on reality. The process, again, is simple. Draw a circle around those we most closely identify with, demonize those outside that boundary, then dehumanize them so we can more easily deny their inherent worth and dignity. Chalmers says a philosophical zombie isn't the Hollywood version that's risen from the dead. Instead, it's a being that looks and behaves just like an ordinary human being, but is not conscious at all. For a philosophical zombie, everything is dark inside. Is this what we convince ourselves is true of those whose lives and welfare and dignity we so easily disregard? That they are dark inside. That they are zombies without any real moral status. That, like ants, can simply be crushed if they get in our way, if they creep into our pantries, cross our borders, vote against us, move into our neighborhoods, cross our red lines. Although the concept of universal human worth and dignity has been central to global democracy since the French Revolution, and since has been embedded in constitutions in nations like Germany, Italy, Ireland, Japan, Israel, South Africa, and the United States, among others, we have all had a hard time living up to this great aspiration. I'm grateful to be part of a religion that considers, at least for the time being, respect for the inherent worth and dignity to be our first principle, to be our top priority. And it is why I am committed to doing what I can to help our religion survive and thrive so that we can remain that still small voice of society's conscience, a bit of human conscience that reminds us that we must continue to expand our consciousness so that we will grow big enough to include the whole hoop of the world in our realities. So that nobody anywhere will ever be treated like a mindless, soulless zombie. So that there will be no more mass shootings or wars or young women brutalized by the morality police or young black men beaten to death by cops, or people living in freezing tents on barren plots of land and under dark overpasses because we're afraid to let them into our neighborhoods. Our liberal religion, our nation, and the whole of Western culture, if not the whole of humanity, aspires to establish the kind of society that is so fundamental to what it means to be good that even a child can comprehend how we ought to treat each other. Won't you please, won't you please, please, won't you be my neighbor? Thank you.
Well, our closing song today is I Can See Clearly Now, and I chose it because it was full of hope, but also admitted to obstacles. So if you will rise as you're willing and able to sing it with me. I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me down. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. I think I can make it now, the pain is gone. All of the bad feelings have disappeared. Here is that rainbow I've been praying for. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, there's nothing but blue skies. I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone is the dark clouds that had me down. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day.
Our benediction this morning is from Ram Dass, who says, "We are all just walking each other home. Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom."
Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom. Great. I don't know. I'm not sure. I was only texting during the service. Brendan, my son left my mom's house because he had a job and he thought I was going to have a And I didn't know what to do with my sisters. I've been swallowing Virotac until I was, 55. Nose and dripping and all that. I don't know what I should go there.
What
Exactly.
Is there any way that you can get a hold of the caregiver to step in?
She already has, she doesn't come into the house. They already have it. So Brendan was mad because I didn't text her. I mean, I jumped out of bed. I jumped in my clothes. I realized I was sick when I was getting in the car, and I came here and come on, it doesn't stop. I suppose I could have texted him in between services, but that would have been too late. He left at 9 o'clock. Hi, Donna. I had, I don't, that, I'm afraid that,